This segment was made possible by Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Arlington, which is funded in part by the Bishop's Lenten Appeal. We thank all who support this critical appeal and ministries it funds. You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, many of us take pleasure touring a museum filled with beautiful works of art. For the artist, it is a means of expressing themselves, and in some cases, communicating a raw emotion that they would not have been able to express verbally. See how one mental health expert is using art therapy to assist women and children who have experienced traumatic events and even abuse. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese.
Lindsay, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here.
So before we get into the program that you're involved with art therapy and these women in need there, talk about the work of St. Margaret of Cortona, the Transitional Housing Unit.
Absolutely. So St. Margaret of Cortona is a transitional housing program. So that basically means it's intermediary housing for families as they're transitioning out of homelessness. We provide 12 apartments that families can come from homeless shelters and live in for up to 24 months. That's the kind of, we don't call it a lease exactly, but that's the program length.
Gotcha.
And that really, within that time frame, that gives them a lot of time to be able for the healing and recovery and life changes that need to happen to occur.
How long have you been there?
I've been there for almost a year and a half coming up.
Okay. How did you first hear about it?
Just in searching for different programs, I've always had a passion for servitude and wanting to work with marginalized populations and vulnerable people. Art therapy is a really powerful intervention for traumatized populations, and so looking for that, I kind of stumbled upon St. Margaret's, and I thought it seemed like a really amazing program, and I was really excited about introducing what art therapy could do there.
Very cool. So you were in college and went straight into this work from college?
Yes.
Okay, so talk about what you were studying and kind of what made you so passionate about that field of work.
Of course. So yes, I was in undergrad. I was originally in a different field or a different line. And one of my roommates had mentioned, Lindsay, I think you'd be really interested in art therapy, when I realized the field I was pursuing wasn't exactly where my values aligned. Mm-hmm. And I very much value seeing other people thrive and building everyone up. And I always have also been passionate about creativity and arts, and that's always been an outlet and a form of expression for me. Never had I heard of art therapy. So when she mentioned this, I was like, no, what is that? I started Googling and just doing a bunch of research on my own to find out what is art therapy. And the more I read and the more I learned, it just was amazing. And it very much felt like an epiphany of, oh, wow, this is exactly where I should be. And then divine intervention, the undergrad Marymount University where I attended had a pre-art therapy track. So it just felt perfect. Then after that, I pursued my master's in art therapy at Florida State University, and really got into knowing what is art therapy and how do I do this, how do I use it. It's very similar to talk therapy, traditional counseling, but we use art throughout the process.
Very cool. Are there a lot of art therapy programs out there, or did you just get lucky?
I got pretty lucky. There's about, I'm going to go with around 60 in the U.S. of master's programs, but having that pre-art therapy option in undergrad, rare. That doesn't happen as common. A lot of times people pursuing art therapy at a master's level, their backgrounds are going to be in art and psychology, which is very much what the pre-art therapy track at Marymount was. But to have it labeled and have that defined option versus just kind of getting, general art and psych, being able to have the pre-art therapy track was pretty cool and felt like a sign. So
did you bring art therapy to the Catholic Charities program there, or did you, you kind of initiated that. What was that like getting it started?
Oh my goodness, it was so exciting and so scary because I was just out of grad school, so I was not only just kind of entering into the workforce, but also delivering something that I've so passionately believed in. And I remember during my interview telling Ronnie, our program director, about what art therapy is. I was applying for the position of a traditional mental health counselor, and that's generally a lot of times art therapists do that, apply for mental health counseling positions. But then we really have to sell what is art therapy and what is going to make this different, and even another different type of option that may be better for this setting, and just kind of explaining how art therapy works on a nonverbal level is really powerful. And also, a lot of times in certain vulnerable populations, trust is tough. It's a really hard thing to earn. And in doing art therapy, I don't always have to ask for their trust to trust me first. It's about trusting the process. Just trust the art. Trust yourself. Trust the materials in front of you. I know you've been through a lot, and it's okay. I get that you don't want to talk about it with me, and I'm okay with that. And I just kind of create this space that can be very therapeutic for them. And then they get into the art, and then the art does the talking. And then after that, we can start to tease apart what is happening visually and how is that related to what's happening in your life. And it just creates this way to talk about things that almost depersonalizes them from the issue. And it really can be amazing. So when Ronnie, my, again, program director, had learned about that, she thought that was a really cool idea, especially within the setting of St. Margaret's, knowing all that the women have been through and what they've endured in their life, and recognizing how in the past trust is always an issue and something that they've dealt with head on, and trying to navigate that. She was excited to hear that art therapy was an option.
So when you said a lot of people that bring art therapy programs to whatever it is that they're doing, they're really applying for another position and then introduce that as a way to achieve the same goal as what the position did. Do most people have a hard time getting it sold? Does it sound too hippy-dippy? Does it sound like, what is the general perception? Not necessarily, obviously Catholic Charities was game for it, but what about people in other settings?
I think art therapy, there's a large growing body of research. I mean, even the second lady, Karen Pence, this is what she's promoting. That's her field, is art therapy. So it's very much a growing field. A lot of hospitals have created art therapy positions where there are jobs and people recognizing, employers saying, you know what, this is a separate position that needs to exist, and we need an art therapist to fill that role. But then there are cases like me where I was applying for mental health counselor roles and just hoping. And I think a lot of times art therapists do have success finding that, so long as they can get their foot in the door and are able to explain how and why this is powerful and what makes this work. I think a lot of times people can understand it. There's a lot of neuroscience that supports and backs art therapy. I can get into that when describing the trauma. But yeah, there's tons of research on how and why this is effective, mostly in the form of case studies, but there even is quantitative research.
Let's talk a little bit about that in a second, but first, what are some examples of the backstories of these women that are coming to St. Margaret's? Obviously, homelessness is kind of a precondition of getting in there, but talk a little bit about some of the backstories, examples of that, and then from there we'll kind of get into why it maybe works to use this creative method.
Of course. So the backstories, wow, they're very powerful, a lot of times really heavy trauma histories. So homelessness in and of itself is a traumatic experience, as you can imagine. A lot of them were homeless as kids, and that was kind of something they've experienced, and that's just what they've known their whole life. In addition to that comes a lot of forms of abuse, so neglect, witnessing domestic violence. They themselves, most of our families have endured and survived domestic violence. Sexual abuse sometimes. It's really heavy stuff and really hard experiences. But what I always like to remind them is that they are still standing today. No matter what they've experienced and what they've gone through, here they are sitting in front of me, and just, wow, you're a survivor. Like, you fought through all of this and you're still fighting.
When they're going through that therapy, do they feel strong because of what they've gone through, or do they feel like weakened and kind of psychologically battered by it?
It's definitely, there's definitely a lot of hurt and wound that comes along with that. But I try to focus on empowering them to recognize that was strength. I know a lot of times people kind of want to try to own that for their own, where this is my fault, or, I made this happen. It's my fault this happened to me. And I try to take them out of that mentality by empowering them and helping them recognize, no, you took strength and that took courage, and you were able to leave, and look what you are doing for yourself and your kids now in creating a better life for them. I really try to focus on the strengths and pull out the empowering pieces.
So you could sit and talk to someone like that in a traditional therapy setting. What does the art therapy do that you wouldn't get through just an exchange like you were talking about?
How this works is as I mentioned, there's a lot of times at first a defensiveness and maybe a guardedness to therapy. At St. Margaret's, therapy is required. These aren't people, a lot of times people go to seek therapy on their own. This is something they want to do for themselves. But then you also have those populations that are sometimes mandated, where it's required. And in the St. Margaret setting, again, it's a required piece because we know that therapy and mental health is an important piece of their recovery.
Okay.
But it's required. So they're not necessarily always looking forward to, great, I get to go meet with my therapist today. That's not necessarily what they're thinking or what they want to do. So art therapy feels a lot less invasive, and like I said, it can kind of depersonalize things. It uses this nonverbal component. And why I keep mentioning this nonverbal, this word, it's important because when looking at trauma, I mentioned the neuroscience. There is a lot of research about how trauma impacts the brain. It's a really important thing to understand. And basically, trauma occurs in the amygdala and the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is responsible for memory. So memories become fragmented in the brain when they're exposed to traumatic incidences. And it depends on how the person experiences that event. So
what do you mean by fragmented? I don't want to get lost too far. So you're saying the memory gets stored in the brain because of the trauma?
No. Your body is saving itself, your brain is going into protective
so
mode,
it's blocking
things out.
Okay.
So it's only getting bits and pieces.
So
with that, and there's a famous trauma researcher, Vessel van der Kolk, and he talks about how even the language component of the brain, the Brocal area, is shut down. So encoding those traumatic memories, they don't have a language verbal part attached. So this is where art therapy can become really powerful because, think of PTSD. One of the biggest symptoms is flashbacks.
Right.
Flashbacks are images, right? Like there are these things you're remembering, but it's really hard to talk about it, of what's going on. Well, now we can put that into the artwork and let's create, what does this look like? How did you feel at that time? What can we get from that? And now we can start to rebuild and we can get the full timeline of what happened. And then once we do that, now we can get a beginning, a middle, and an end.
So you put those fragments back together so they can kind of repair and heal from it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of it.
So what kind of art is it that you're doing? Is it like, drawings? Is it watercolors? Is it
It's anything and
clay?
everything.
Okay.
So it's not that the trauma narratives aren't just the only thing we're doing in terms of trauma recovery, but that's just one example of kind of how it works. And we use all artistic mediums, processes. Sometimes I even use recyclable materials and things, especially something I want to teach is, art is around us everywhere and we can always, even though when resources are minimal, how can we still create and find those outlets? But yeah, I use watercolor, clay, oil pastel, chalk pastel, colored pencil, markers.
Whatever the person feels most comfortable with, or?
So that is another piece of all that we learn in grad school of how to select the medium. And there's different psychological qualities to different mediums that we use. So something like colored pencil is a lot more restrictive and a lot more controlled. So someone who at that time needs to exert control over what they're doing, or maybe they have maybe really poor boundaries and poor control, so they need something like colored pencil and something a little bit more restrictive to be able to work through some of these things. Versus watercolor, it's a lot more fluid. It can sometimes regress a client. It can sometimes trigger a client, but it also can help evoke some inner emotions.
Wow.
So the artwork that we use depends on whatever the client is, wherever the client is, whatever they need in that moment. I'm staying attuned to the client in that space and offering what I am kind of reading as this is what's going to be best for them. Sometimes if I don't earlier on and if I don't really know a client, or depending on their clients, just wherever they are, I'll give them a range where I'll say, here's these various materials that you can try using. And then depending on what they pick, I can also get a little bit of information on where are they at today? Are they looking for something more controlled, or are they open and kind of feeling loose and ready to go? So it can provide some information about clinical assessment information for me too, just kind of reading what is the client doing, where are they at, what do they need.
Does it work with children too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you work with children or?
Sometimes. I work with some of the kids at St. Margaret's. We
Yeah.
do have a child services coordinator who mostly focuses on them, but I do work with some of the kids. It's not required for them to be in therapy, but whenever the parents request it or whenever we kind of see fit, I will work with the kids.
Because I can imagine it would help some kids because they'll have that same memory issue that you're talking about, but they also don't necessarily have the language skills to start with to express.
You're spot on. That's exactly
so even if they had the story, they might not be able to articulate it.
Or understand it, like some of the complex things that happens to kids, homelessness. How do you even kind of begin to understand that that you've had this experience? And so art can become an outlet and a way to just kind of explore some of these themes in a way that's safe and contained, and you can kind of put a box on it.
Yeah. Does any of this happen in group setting, or is it mostly individual, like one-on-one?
It's so mostly what I do is individual. However, this absolutely does happen in group settings. Actually, this week I'm starting a group therapy on Wednesday nights with a focus on mindfulness, about just kind of staying present and centering yourself and trying to find some groundedness. Anxiety can be a really big thing that our residents deal with. So just kind of finding time and space for yourself and allowing awareness, just time and space for awareness versus judgment. So
you said a year and a half you've been in this program. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the greatest lesson you've learned? So you're somewhat new to the field, but you do have experience with it, you studied it. What's the greatest lesson you've learned over the last year and a half?
It's twofold, I'd say. I'd say one piece of it is just this appreciation for the people we serve. I think there's just so much that these people have gone through, and that can be really heartbreaking and really tough, but just how strong they truly are. Hearing the stories is actually in some ways kind of inspiring for me, where it's like, wow, you still stand here today, and I just can't get over that. And so that, for me, is a huge takeaway of just what it means to truly persevere. And then the other thing I think that I've learned is recognizing the small steps and the baby steps is a big thing. Therapeutically and, just in general in life, I feel like sometimes you are always looking for these giant steps and something monumental and these huge changes and shifts. And I think it's really important to take a step back and just recognize that success comes in small strides sometimes, and just really learning how to have an appreciation for that and see how much a person is trying, even in the most minor ways, is pretty cool.
What does progress look like for a woman who's come out of homelessness? She might have been abused in some way. She may have children. I mean, all these compounding factors of tragedy and sadness and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
What does progress look like? Do you have any specific examples you can maybe give?
Yeah. So recently we even had one family graduate from the program where she was able to, through St. Margaret's, we have part of what the program does is an educational budget assistance. So she was able to get a certification in phlebotomy, and which helps increase her earning power.
I bet, yeah.
We've worked through a lot of her trauma history therapeutically to a place where she kind of can keep fighting on and kind of has a sense of understanding, and also can take herself and recognize this isn't her fault. So she's graduated from the program, and she's secured housing for her family. She moved to Bristol, where it's a little cheaper down in that area. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so she was able to graduate from the program and now can hopefully not return to shelter and really create this life for herself. But even smaller than that, in each session, I always look for markers of progress and just what has a client done today and what's happening within the artwork. So the same family, I was working with her son as well. And something we look at is sometimes in how the person depicts themselves visually, and to see how when I started seeing, I think he was 7, and at the end he was 9. Just to see how his self-image has grown. It started off as this little stick figure, and then it's this full-fledged boy with curly hair and, colorful clothes and all different features just going on. It was amazing to see how he really blossomed just in his artwork. But yeah, you can see it visually too, which I think is another cool thing about art therapy. It's something tangible to show look how far we've come throughout all of this time. And, at St. Margaret's, it's a 24-month program. So, wow, look where we started. And I'll pull out something they made in the very first session, and then I'll pull out something else. And of course, by then, a lot of trust has been built and we've done a lot of different things. So it's just, once the person becomes a little bit more invested in the therapeutic process too, you can really start seeing how powerful things are happening.
That's, yeah, because typically, and I would imagine a therapy setting, you don't have the physical reminders or proof. They might not believe they've made progress, but you can kind of demonstrate it through the work that they've done.
Exactly.
You talked about self-sufficiency a second ago. One hallmark of Catholic Charities and pretty much every program is the idea that they want to build you up from where you are so that you don't need them anymore.
Right.
Right. The idea is if you're always coming back to us for food, we've missed the mark somewhere. What can we do to maybe help get you on that path? When these women come into the program, do they believe they can get to that point, or are they suspect that they will have that success? And what is it like for them when they do graduate? As a therapist, what are you seeing healed there that illuminates that for them, that they're able to do this?
Yeah. So I think that's tough. I think that a lot of times families really want to believe they can, but so long, and I mean, even generationally, messages have told them that this isn't possible. So I think as much as they want to believe it, I think they believe it as much as they can. Yeah. But I know that they're constantly fighting messages of self-doubt and questioning their own worth and am I even worthy of this? I know that's something. I have one person right now who's a new resident where it's like, this is such a blessing and I cannot believe I have this opportunity, but I don't think I deserve it. So just trying to tease that apart and helping them recognize you are here for a reason and God put you here because you can, and helping to try to allow people to see that for themselves and guide them into recognizing and owning that message instead of some of the earlier messages that they've been taught. But then in time, I think that's kind of the transformational piece, is them stepping into that role and recognizing I am worthy and I can do this, and seeing how it goes. And I always tell them the path to success isn't straight up. There's going to be hiccups along the way, and we definitely hit some roadblocks, but it's finding ways around them and how do you keep moving forward. That's what you have to hold on to. So I think those clients who kind of get that message and are able to see, all right, it's okay, this happened, but let me keep on going, and who keep fighting for what they want and truly want it and believe it, they're the ones who really are able to make the biggest strides in success and graduate from the program.
Well, it must certainly be challenging for you. I would imagine it's also an enormous blessing to see these women that are worth so much. They don't believe it yet. Yeah. So you get to work to help guide them to that place. It must be a tremendous blessing to be able to do that. Oh,
absolutely. Like I said, that's one of the most powerful things about this job for me, is that experience and getting to be a witness to that process. It's truly amazing, and I do feel really blessed to be there.
Catholic Charities is always looking to expand things and grow things and improve things. What do you need? So for people that are listening, actually I have two questions.
Sure.
First one is, what do you need most? So if someone's listening, they want to help. They love what they're hearing. They want to help these women. What do you need most?
Volunteers. We can always benefit from volunteers. On Wednesday nights, we have life skills, which is an opportunity for parents to gain we'll have different financial advisors come in to talk about budgeting or things. But at that time, it's really hard for mom to stay attuned to what's happening in class when she's got her little tots and her kiddos running around. Yeah. So we have volunteers. We have a team of a couple amazing volunteers who will babysit and provide free childcare for that hour.
Wonderful.
And so having more volunteers who are able to kind of give that chunk of time in the evenings so that these moms have that opportunity is huge. And then even other times we need volunteers to help assemble furniture or different types of things. Yeah. Moving can be complicated, and a lot of times these families don't have supports. So various steps in those processes can be helpful. And then even just donations are we receive donations in the form of diapers, shampoo, conditioner, toilet paper, those types of soft goods that are really important, families need regardless.
Yeah, continuous needs and not cheap.
Yes.
Yeah, especially diapers. I've got little ones in diapers. That is a cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned volunteers first, because we're not always asking for people's money.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes we just want your time.
Yes, volunteers is one of the most important things. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest ways that we could use some extra help right now.
I bet that'd be a good witness too for those women to see other women who are doing what they think they can't do, but realizing they're just like anybody else. You can get there.
Absolutely.
Wow, very cool. So for someone who's listening, that's obviously not homeless and is great in need as these women, but they feel like art therapy would be something they might benefit from or their kids might benefit from, how do you find out about art therapy programs? Like, how do you research that?
How to find an art therapist?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the American Art Therapy Association is kind of like
there's an association for everything.
There's an association, exactly. And so
that's great.
That's a good place to start searching. On their website. They have a Find an Art Therapist tab where you can go in and find a credentialed art therapist who has the training in it.
Yeah.
I'd say that's probably your best bet. Also looking at Psychology Today, that's a good resource in terms of just finding a therapist.
Okay.
But then searching art therapist and looking for the credentials ATR or ATRBC. Those two are the general art therapy licenses.
Okay. Okay, very good. And how can people find out more about the program? Where do they go?
Catholic Charities website. If you just follow down the line, there's a housing program. Clicking on the housing tab.
Yeah.
Then we have the St. Margaret's Family Housing page. So in there, that's kind of just an explanation of what we do, and then also our eligibility requirements are on there. So if you know of a family, or there's people who are in need of these types of services, you can also look at our eligibility requirements and feel free to call and reach out, and we'd be happy to send over a referral packet.
All right, so that's ccda.net to go to the website. You go to housing, and you can find St. Margaret's from there. Catholic Charities is also on social media. They're on Twitter. They're on Facebook. I believe they're on Instagram, but I know at least Facebook and Twitter. You can find out more and stay in touch with them. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this ministry. It's wonderful to hear about these women that have had such tough experiences finding some healing through art therapy and the work that you do. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you for listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that will inspire, educate, and inform you about the Catholic faith and our diocesan community.